So you fired up Age of Empires 2, ran your benchmark test and hopped into the first few online ranked games, only to find out that your elo is dropping faster than you can type GG in the chat. But don't worry, I've played hundreds of games and compiled for you the top 5 essential tips to get you from beginner to pro in no time. And if you stick around until the end of the video, I might even reveal tip number 6 about how to turn around a losing game. So stick around and let's go. There is no getting around it. Before we even talk about build orders, you have to understand a few hotkeys. Playing Age of Empires without hotkeys is like playing the piano with just one finger. You will manage, but the outcome is nowhere near what you can achieve. It enables you to multitask, focus on what's important, and execute your strategy next to immediately. In terms of the method, so when you head into the game options and hit hotkeys, the menu is completely overwhelming and I don't recommend you start this way. Instead, let's just head into a game and assemble our essential hotkeys one at a time. In terms of the basic hotkeys, there are 3 that are 100% essential and will be used almost non-stop throughout the game. The first one is going to the town center. For me, that's on the letter H, which is easily reachable via my index finger. That's why I have it there. And this key is what enables you to steer both the fight on the front lines, but also keep your economy running back at home. Jump to selected is our next essential hotkey, which you can do via the spacebar. The reason why this is so valuable is to do with control groups. Say you have 2 or more armies in the field and want to quickly switch between them. For demonstration, we will use the scout and 2 sheep here. You can put each group on a different number at the top of your keyboard. You do this by selecting the group of units and hitting Ctrl plus that number, which assigns the hotkey. Now if you select whatever else and just hit that number, your game will select those units. Now hit the spacebar and you will jump right to them. Super useful in any situation in the game. Hotkey number 3 that is super basic and everybody needs is the Go to Idle Villager hotkey. Super important for keeping your economy running, and you will want to spam that button regularly to ensure you don't have idle villagers. If you press the button and you don't have any idle villagers, you'll hear this sound. And this will tell you that everything's fine and you can keep focusing on whatever you were doing. But if you do, it will jump right to them. Now, since I use that button a lot, I personally have it on my mouse, right where my thumb is, but obviously put it wherever you're comfortable. Speaking of villagers, the next most important group of hotkeys is for your villager's building menu on the bottom left. Every building you construct with villagers should be done via hotkeys. What I personally recommend is to mirror the layout you see in the menu itself to your keyboard to make things logical. First decision is whether you are building an economy or a military building, which for me is A for economy and S for military. Once you are, for example, in the economy building menu, you have 3 rows of buildings, which we can nicely map to the left-hand side of our keyboard, starting with the top letter row, Q, then W, E, R, T. And then for the farm, we move down into the next row on our keyboard, starting with A, and so forth. And the very same logic also applies to your military buildings menu that you accessed with the letter S. This can be the same hotkeys, given that your economy buildings aren't available in the military section. Pro tip: once you have selected your building, whether it's military or economy, but before you have placed it, hold down Shift and you can place the selected building multiple times. Second pro tip: if you're looking to build farms around mills or town centers, hold down Shift and place the farm on the town center itself, as it will automatically place it on the next free available space for you. Now that we have built a bunch of buildings, it's important to be able to select them easily without endlessly searching for them. We've already learned one such hotkey earlier, which is selecting the town center. For pumping out units, you will need access to your military buildings. I generally select my buildings by adding Ctrl plus the letter I used to originally build it. So for example, if you build your barracks using the letter Q, you should put selecting your barracks on Ctrl Q. Age of Empires 2 offers you to assign 2 separate hotkeys for going to the next barracks and for selecting all of them. Now, I find it quite annoying to have to select each barracks individually and then queue up units for production. That's why I wouldn't bother with a hotkey for it and simply assign Ctrl Q to selecting all barracks at once. The reason is, if you then produce units, it'll even spread them out across all of your barracks instead of queuing up all of them in just one barracks. How cool is that? And you'll notice you are literally in 2 places at once, because your screen isn't actually switching to the barracks themselves, but just selecting them. So you can still produce units while watching the battle and avoiding getting all of your archers killed by that one nasty onager shot. How double cool. You can do the same selection assignment with your economy buildings, such as blacksmith or market. For me, since I build a market by hitting A and then D, I select it via hitting Ctrl D. While we're talking about pumping out units, you might have already noticed that you can produce the units themselves with hotkeys as well. This is super easy, just again map the menu to the keyboard. You only have one row for production buildings, so feel free to pick whether you want to produce, for example, your archers by hitting Q or A, but I do recommend to stay in just one row. Another pro tip here, just like we can build multiple houses by holding down Shift, we can produce multiple units by holding down Shift, 5 to be exact per click. This also works for villager production. Go ahead and try that out. Beyond this, I really recommend getting rid of all hotkeys that you don't need at some point. For example, I rarely ever play campaign, so I can get rid of hotkeys like selecting the hero. And this concludes the first section on hotkeys. Congratulations! 4 more to go, the next one is build orders. Ever played a game and while you're still marveling at your beautiful village in Dark Age, the opponent is already visiting with 5 scouts at minute 11? That is because they have learned a build order. Build orders are sequences of actions that are optimized to achieve a certain goal, like reaching feudal age at minute 11 or having 3 scouts at minute 11 and a half. There are plenty of build orders all over YouTube that you can look at, and the most common one I see is Fast Castle. But for 1v1s, I would actually recommend that on open land maps like Arabia, you choose Fast Feudal into Scouts or Archers, because that can create so much pressure and overwhelm all the Fast Castle guys that you will win the game early. Let's take a look at how that works and add it to your arsenal. So this build order leads to you clicking Feudal Age around 6 minutes 30 and 19 pop. Let's take a look. So first things first, we immediately queue up 3 villagers using our hotkeys and we build 2 houses. It's important to build them 2 and 1 so that all villagers are busy. And meanwhile, we send 1 goat to the town center already ready to be picked up by our villagers once they're done with the houses. All other goats in the meantime will go exploring just like the scout. We've also put our scout on control group 1 so we can immediately jump to him whenever we need to. The goal at the beginning is to find all our rhinos in this case, which is the same as a boar, as well as all our deer, in this case ostriches and zebras, and all our remaining goats. There are 4 goats to be found. So this is very important. You want to do that as quickly as possible so that your scout can focus on bringing in the deer. The deer bringing will be completely optional, but let's focus on that later. For now, we put our first 6 villagers on the initial goat that we've sent right into the town center. Now I know a lot is happening here, so feel free to pause the video whenever you need to. When the first goat is done, we already have the second one that was sent back, and now the next villager will go to our woodline, and this is the second reason why we sent all our goats to explore at the beginning. We want to find the optimal woodline. We've identified it here. We place our lumber camp in the middle of it, also very important, and right on it. Do not leave a tile of space. Trees go down quickly, so you want it nice and tight. For gold, you always leave 1 tile because the gold lasts longer. The second villager also goes on the wood, and that's it. We don't need more than that for now. I'll come back to this sequence later because if you want to try a slightly slower build where it's not about perfection as much as this one, you would send 3 on wood. But here we only do 2, and the next one goes out to get the first rhino. But before we do that, and you could do this like 1 vil later, this is completely up to you, we build a house. But I like to integrate the house into my house wall that's going to build up later on in the game, so I like to do that with the guy that hunts down the rhino. Now, while we simply put more villagers on food here, 2 things I haven't explained so far. The first one is these little flags that you see when I send the scout around. You can do that by holding down Shift. This way the scout will do 1 flag after the other. The other thing I haven't mentioned yet, and it's usually a question by a lot of people, is why don't we go straight to berries? The reason for that is that deer and rhinos and all those kinds of herdables actually enable faster food collection. And so that's why we want to use them first whenever we can. Now here we're luring in the first rhino. A common thing is here to have 6 villagers that are usually put on a control group again, to garrison them into the town center, 2 shots on the rhino from the town center, then you ungarrison them, and you get the final shot out with those. This is very important because if you shoot the rhino with the town center, it will provide 0 food, so that is rather terrible. We queue up further villagers, all on food. This build order is nice and simple to remember in that way that after the 2 on wood, you put everything on food. What we're doing here is called deer luring. In this case, it's a gazelle, not a deer, but the principle is the same. The deer will always run away from active units. The scout is such a unit, so if we chase it, it will run away. We bring it all the way to the town center. This can be very daunting and exhausting to do as a beginner, so don't feel pressured to do that. This is basically a free add-on. Now, with our villager number 15 that just came out, we're going to go and get the second rhino as well. And then after that, we're done putting people on herdables in the town center. The next villager will go forward to build a mill. Now, we don't strictly have to do that for resource reasons. We more so do it because we need 2 buildings to advance into the next time. And again, you can see how this is all a lot to handle at the beginning, so again, don't feel pressured to put in deer. The next 2 villages will go to wood, and that will conclude our 19 population count, 18 villages and 1 scout. Now, one of the things that I do, every minor imperfection of this build so far will mean you don't have the 500 food to click up into the next age. When that happens, like in this case, you saw it there very briefly, I just get loom. Because usually in this build order, if everything goes completely flawlessly, then you can click into feudal age without getting loom, meaning you're up even quicker and your scouts come out even quicker. But if you're missing a few resources to do it, just throw in a loom, it costs 50 gold and doesn't harm your build in any other way, and then you can keep going. So we clicked up here at around 640, if I saw that right. That's not too bad. It is because we got loom, so that is fine. Now, since we were very greedy on wood so far, we have to immediately shift a bunch of villages to wood. I usually do 8. That should be enough to build a house, a barrack, and then as soon as you hit feudal age, the stable. Because remember, the point of this build is to immediately build a stable once we hit feudal age, and to also have enough to continuously produce vills. And the cool thing about this one is also you can get the first economy upgrade on wood. Wood is always the most basic resource in everything, so you always want to have enough wood so that you can build farms, that you can build your buildings. It is absolutely essential. Now you'll see the herdables will run out in a second. You just shift those villages over to the berries, which you can do now, and then you are good to go into feudal age. And we're well underway here. The enemy will lose their scout, nice little add-on, but I almost lose a goat. We're getting it back though. And here we go, close to feudal age. The village is almost ready with the barracks. This is also very important, because if we don't have the barracks, we can't build the stable. And here we go. You're going to hit feudal age well before 10 minutes. That will be better than most of your opponents if you're around 1000 elo. And our villager is ready to build the next stable. We have enough pop space to build villages. And we've done double bidax. And one hotkey I would mention here is also, for me, I've put that on Q, which is villagers drop their resources to the next available spot and continue their work. Now I know this was a lot to take in, but don't worry, because here is your overview to take a screenshot of for fast feudal. The thing that happens a lot in Age of Empires 2 is that people have learned a build order, much like a chess opening, but when that's done, they have no idea what to do next, which is why the next essential tip is on army composition. I recommend looking at 2 things when deciding which units to build. For people who are very new to the game, there are broadly speaking 4 types of land units: infantry, archers, cavalry, and siege. In each of those categories, except for siege, you have a weak unit that only costs food and or wood, and usually only counters one certain enemy unit. And you have a strong unit that also costs gold in each category, which is a much more scarce resource. And with that knowledge, let's look at the first method to decide on your ideal army composition. This is purely based on your civilization and what they are good at. During Dark Age, whenever you have a few spare seconds, head into the tech tree and quickly scan for which gold units your civilization has access to that 1. They can fully develop, 2. They have all the blacksmith upgrades for, and 3. Maybe they even have a civilization bonus for. That will be your main unit. As an example, in this case, we are playing Burgundians, and let's have a quick look. No full upgrades on archers. They do get most barracks upgrades for their champions, and they get full upgrades for Paladin except Bloodlines. So our choices are either Champions or Paladins as our ultimate gold unit here. Looking at the Blacksmith, we get all infantry and cavalry upgrades, so still open choice. But remember, the third part where we look for civilization-specific bonuses? Well, nothing about infantry here, but we can see stable technologies cost 50% less, which is huge for the Paladin upgrade in particular, and we can get the Cavalier upgrade 1 age earlier. This makes cavalry the obvious main choice for this example as our gold unit. And step 2 of this method is to think about what counters our main gold unit, which for cavalry is mainly the spearman line. Since we expect our opponent to build those, we need a cheap unit to counter theirs, which will be skirmishers. And don't worry, you'll get better at knowing this right away, for between just the weak units, here is a simple overview to keep in mind. Each is weak against one and strong against another, a bit like the 3 starting Pokemon really. Anyway, the reason we preferably pick a non-gold unit to accompany our gold unit is so we don't rely too heavily on gold, which would be risky since we can get cut off or not mine enough. The last step in this method is really simple. Add a siege unit, so you can destroy your enemy's defensive buildings like castles or town centers. If you want to see a real game example on why it can literally lose you the game if you ignore this, watch my video up here. A siege unit can be trebuchets out of a castle if you're in Imperial Age, or rams and mangonels if you're still in Castle Age. If your gold unit is already a really high HP unit with high damage, such as knights, you might even get away without siege. But if you are mainly playing archers, you definitely need them. Moving on to method number 2 for army selection. Obviously you are playing against somebody who's doing the same thing as you on the other side, and it might just be that your army composition is weak to theirs. Imagine in our Burgundian example, our opponent isn't actually playing pikemen, but instead chooses camels. They counter both our paladin and our skirmishers. And this is exactly where the game becomes interesting and why thousands of players still play it every day. Now you need to do what's called a tech switch, which is switching your technology development to build the counter unit to their gold unit. In this case, probably, that means building your own halberdiers. Hotkeys, as always, will help you massively in quickly building the required buildings, jumping to your blacksmiths, shifting your economy, and pumping out fresh units. As you get better, you can obviously do all of that preemptively before even seeing what they're building. But that requires you to not only check or even know one tech tree, but two, and that can be tricky. Again, do not worry, your civilization knowledge will build over time. Another thing worth mentioning at this point is that scouting will help you make these decisions very early on and not when your opponent is already knocking at your door or striking down your army. And with that we have army composition in the bag and move on to chapter number 4, which is resource management. One of the most common things when I beat my friends in Age of Empires is that they die with thousands of resources banked up. This is bad. There is no point in dying rich. Every bit of excess resource could have been another unit, another castle, another production building to win you the game. As a rule of thumb, you should never have more than 1,000 of any resource saved up, unless it's for a very specific purpose, and over time that number should come down a lot. That is even more important at the beginning of the game, where every second counts and 3 or 5 units can make all the difference. Now, there are 3 main ways to achieve a healthy resource balance. And the first one is don't collect resources you don't need. The example here is my good friend Jinglish collecting silly amounts of wood in Feudal Age when what he really needs is food to get into Castle Age. Yet he only has 3 villages on farms. That 1,500 excess wood could have been farms minutes ago and he would have been in Castle Age easily. Whenever you send a villager to a resource in the game, ask yourself why? And use the little will count icons next to the resources in the top left corner to make sure your economy is balanced. And tip number 2 for better resource management is spending your resources. Constantly check your resource balance, and if you're like my unfortunate friend Bond here and accidentally have more than 3,000 food and yet enough for another castle, you need to do something with it. Build those castles, pump out those units and get the tech in. Unused resources are wasted resources, and I promise you they are one of the key reasons why you lose games. Finally, tip number 3 is use the market. This is the last resort, but to balance out your eco this can be super helpful, but obviously it comes at a steep price. So this tool will help you, but it shouldn't be your go-to, especially when you're floating too much wood. There is really no good reason not to throw down a market and make use of it. This concludes our section on resource management and brings us to our final chapter, which is production. So you've applied all those tips above and made it to the glorious Imperial Age, but your opponent's army is still twice as big as yours and it just won't get smaller. That is because you've stopped building production buildings at some point. In Feudal and early Castle Age, your economy will only support between 1 to 3 town centers and maybe 2 or 3 production buildings. And what I mean by supporting is producing enough resources to keep those buildings constantly pumping out units. However, as your population keeps growing, which it always should until you reach 200 pop, you'll have resources to support way more buildings. So build them. That's how you win in Imperial Age, by using your economy to replenish your armies faster than your opponent. To illustrate this point, imagine you get into a big battle and lose 40 archers in a couple of unfortunate onager shots. If you have 3 archery ranges, it'll take you 6 in-game minutes to replace those 40 archers. If you have 12 archery ranges, it is only 1.5 minutes. This means the player with 12 ranges can lose their army 3 times before you even produced yours once. Or said differently, your opponent's army will be 4 times as big as yours in the same time frame. The same is true for raiding with cheap units such as hussars. Who cares if 20 of them die per minute so long as your production can keep up and send fresh ones. So never be afraid to have 20 production buildings or so in Imperial Age. That is normal and will win you the game. And if you have made it this far into the video, congratulations! Because not only have you learned the 5 essential things to get from beginner to pro, but you've also unlocked tip number 6. And while it is so simple, hear me out, because this has turned around so many losing games in Imperial Age for me, and it's incredibly easy to do. And it is raiding. Raiding simply means sending mobile units around the big fights straight into your enemy's base in order to disrupt their economy. If you look at the idle villager time beginner players accumulate throughout the game, it is madness, because one of the most difficult things in Age of Empires 2 is multitasking, especially if you haven't learned your hotkeys, which most of your opponents haven't. Now imagine, in addition to everything we've discussed so far, you have to deal with a constant stream of about 10 to 15 hussars going around your main army and straight into your economy. And now suddenly you have to garrison, reset your gather points, replenish your villages, all while building and fighting with your army? That's a lot to deal with. This works well in late game, because their base won't be nice and closed anymore. You're likely floating some resources anyway that you have to use for something, because you don't have to do any more technologies or anything like that. And it's one of the few ways how a weaker army composition can still win the game. Cut off your opponent's blood supply and you will eventually win the game, no matter how strong their army is. This works particularly well if your army is more mobile than theirs, and I highly recommend you check out this video where I've done exactly that. And those are your 6 tips for getting from beginner to pro in Age of Empires 2. Let me know via the like button if you enjoyed this video, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.